The sun had barely touched the horizon when the miner set his shovel down for good. His hands were blistered, his pockets empty, but his eyes carried something no gold could buy: peace. Across from him stood the rancher, coat trimmed with wealth and pride, his laughter slicing through the quiet like a whip. "You'd trade fortune for faith?" he sneered. The miner's voice came low, steady as mountain stone. "You can keep your gold. I'll keep my soul." And in that echo, every man in the dusty saloon felt the weight of what truly holds value. Before we ride deeper into the story, if the spirit of the old frontier still stirs your heart, the campfire tales, the courage, the dust, and the honor, then saddle up with us. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you'll never miss another ride through the legends of the Wild West. Now, let's get back to the trail. Dawn crawled over the ridgeline like a slub-burning promise, and Eli Ward kept digging as if the earth might finally confess its secret to him. Years had taught him the rhythm of rock and river, the cold thrill of finding a sliver of sun and mud, but this morning every strike of steel against stone echoed hollow, as if the ground itself had grown tired of answering questions about worth. His hands, blistered and brown as old leather, trembled not from exertion but from a fatigue that had sunk into bone, the weary, private sort that comes from choosing the same hunger for so long you forget why you started. His boots were caked in red dust that clung like memory, his beard a ragged map of seasons passed beneath the scorching sun and nights by a sputtering tin lamp, and his eyes, once bright with the small light of hope, had the steady calm of a man who had counted loss until coins and coffins looked frighteningly similar. He worked slowly now, with the kind of patience that is not hope but acceptance, and each scrape of the shovel peeled away a layer of his old self until the shape beneath it felt unfamiliar and, strangely, lighter. Where once he listened only for the sound of gold telling him he existed, he now noticed bird call, the distant cough of a farm horse, the way the wind skated across shale and turned the bare hills into a living hymn. As the sun lifted, painting the canyon in a pale, honest gold, Eli struck stone and felt the familiar disappointment settle like dust. No glint, no warm way to press into calloused palm, and for the first time in many years he let himself laugh, soft and startled, because the thing he had chased his whole life simply would not buy him back the years he'd sold to it. He paused, planted the shovel, and the gesture felt final and reverent at once. He looked over at the pan and pickaxe lying where he'd set them, tools that had kept him fed and lonely, tools that had taught him to read the language of riverbeds and rootless hearts, then stepped away, the movement deliberate, as if walking off a stage where he'd performed the same desperate role for too long. The town lay a thin line of roofs on the horizon, and with each step toward it he felt a curious unburdening, a loosening of ties that had tightened around his throat for decades. No trumpet of triumph accompanied this leaving, only the small, private relief of the man who had decided to refuse the price the world kept placing on his soul. He thought of the men he'd known who sold pieces of themselves for a glittering promise, friends who drowned in riverbeds, partners who turned hard and silent when fortune thinned, a brother whose laugh he remembered only in flashes, and he whispered to the wind, not with sermon or show but with the quiet clarity of someone who had reached the end of a long argument. "No gold is worth a man's peace." That whisper hung on the morning, carried down the wash and across the low scrub, and in the echo of it there was neither victory nor defeat, only a settling, like dust finding its place after a storm. He walked into town without fanfare, leaving the tools where the earth had claimed them and carrying instead a new sort of weight, one made not of metal but of decisions kept and regrets forgiven enough to be useful, as if he had traded the heft of nuggets for the heavier, steadier thing a man calls integrity. Men looking up from their doors watched him pass. Some nodded with something like suspicion, others with curious respect, but no one shouted him back. The world he returned to was the same town he had once left, hungry and hopeful, yet the shape of his face had altered subtly, lying smoothed by a peace they had not known a year before. He crossed the dusty street toward the saloon not to boast or to beg, but to set the scene for what would follow. Under his shirt his heart beat steady as a bell, and though his pockets were empty he felt, for the first time in years, richly furnished by the quiet knowledge that when faced with the choice between glitter and conscience, he had, at last, chosen the thing that does not corrode. The saloon breathed the day's last light like a living thing. A low, warm exhale that carried the town's dust and gossip in its chest. Eli Ward pushed through the batwing doors and the room tilted toward him as if he were a weather change passing over familiar ground. He walked with the careful, unhurried gait of a man who had learned patience from long seasons of waiting for a vein to show itself. Hat pulled low, shoulders straight though not proud, and for a flicker the pianoist's ragtime broke off mid-phrase, fingers poised above keys as though the music acknowledged a hush that had nothing to do with etiquette. Faces lifted, prospectors with sun-neshed forearms and furtive smiles, drifters who traded names for routes, miners with hands that read rock like scripture, and farmers whose eyes held the long arithmetic of drought and harvest. Each carried in their line of sight a ledger of ambitions they'd once shared with Eli, the dream that gold might remake a life, might buy back what had been lost. And now those same faces regarded him like someone returned from a place they'd stopped believing existed. At the far end of the room, on a raised seat of perceived authority, sat Clay Boone, the rancher who owned half the valley and half the town's swagger. His boots shone the way a man's conscience sometimes gets polished by habit, his coat folded around coins and comfort, and his grin was the practiced thing of a man who measures worth in acreage and ounces. When Eli's shadow crossed Boone's table, the rancher tipped his hat with a casual cruelty and let the laugh out like a bell that wanted everyone to hear its peal. "Heard them out and finally beat you, Ward," he said, voice carrying with the precise, public cruelty of an accusation meant to be repeated. The words landed and echoed, but Eli did not answer with salve or malice. He moved to the bar and asked for water. No whiskey to numb, no brandy to celebrate, and that's all. Soberat gathered the room's attention as surely as a preacher's hand. In a saloon, to order water is to change the currency of a conversation. It is to refuse the quick comfort most men reach for and to say, without sermon, that you have decided to be awake to whatever comes next. The bartender, a knuckled veteran of claims and quarrels, set the glass down with a silence that felt reverent, his hands steady because he'd poured for men in every state grief and triumph could cook them into, and he watched Eli like someone who knew a storm had passed and a different weather had arrived. The silence that followed was heavy, thick as tobacco smoke, full of the tiny, nervous movements that precede either an argument or an awakening. Because when a room used to laughing together stops, it means a new truth has cleaved the air. Boone's smile sharpened into a weapon. He wanted noise, wanted to swing the room back into the comfortable orbit of his jokes and coins, so he let his laugh roll wide and invited the others to join, to reassure themselves that nothing had changed. A handful of his men obliged, thick-shouldered fellows who trusted the hard language of wealth and muscle, tossing their heads and making sport of a man they believed could be bought as anyone else. But Eli's face was plain and steady, the kind that makes the loud look small. He drank the water slowly, each measured swallow a quiet declaration against the clamor of status. Men felt it, something stubborn and simple, and murmurs went up like heat off the floorboards. Speculation, disbelief, the sort of gossip that eats at reputations over years. Clay leaned forward, voice sliding under the room like oil. "You've always had a flair for drama, Ward," he said, the threat cloaked in mockery. "Come on, take a nugget. Let the world know you can be bought." The offer was a trap dressed in a courtesy, the kind of proposition gold knows how to make, and for a long span of seconds Eli said nothing. The lamps cast slow horseshoe glows across his jaw, and when he finally spoke his tone was quiet, not theatrical but carved from long experience. "No gold's worth a man's peace," he said, and the words landed like a stone dropped in still water, sending a ripple through the room that smoothed some faces into shame, hardened others into resistance, and left a new, small silence in their wake, one that tasted of change and challenge in the soft, unyielding fact that some choices, once made in view of witnesses, alter the measure of a town forever. Claybone's invitation came dressed as a challenge, palms played on the table, a practiced swagger that made the coins in his pocket answer with tiny, eager clinks like insects at a lamp. And when Eli slid onto the bench beside him, the room adjusted, not with malice at first but with the habitual curiosity townsfolk reserve for familiar dramas. Boone, bred on acres and appetite, tilted his hat, let a grin spread that had been sharpened by many triumphs, and spoke with the careless cruelty of a man who'd never had to reckon with the cost of his comfort. "Tell me, miner, how's it feel to dig your whole life and come up empty?" Laughter rolled from the tables then, a brittle sound made of too many wagers lost and too many evenings spent counting what might have been. And for a beat the saloon swelled with the companionship of mockery, the easy solidarity of those who keep one another small by sharing the same jokes. Eli felt the laugh like a physical thing scraping his ribs. His jaw tightened, a subtle lock of muscle that let the room know, without spectacle, he was not the same man they'd once measured with their own greed. He could have flamed back, could have hurled the raw heat of insult and regret, and everyone around would have cheered that familiar performance. But he had shed the currency with the pick and pan he left in the wash. Instead, he folded his hands in his lap and met Boone's smirk with a look that held the slow, undeniable weight of someone who had countered what he had traded away and decided the trade had been a bad one. "I didn't come up empty," Eli said, and his voice was quieter than the shout the room expected, but it carried further, carved not from hunger but from a bedrock of hard-won clarity, and as the words landed a sliver of silence knifed through the chatter. Boone's laugh doubled, more theatrical than amused, a performance meant to outmuscle the oddness of a man refusing to be flattered back into appetite. He waved for another round as if drowning the new truth in more spirits and louder clamor could restore the old order. Yet every clink of glass and coin felt suddenly smaller against the steady of Eli's posture. There was something dangerous in a quiet that could not be bought, a kind of power not measured in ounces but in choices kept. And the room, a creature of reflex and bravado, sensed it like an animal smelling rain. Boone pushed further, leaning forward, the coins on his fingers a clattering accusation. "Take a nugget, Ward. Prove you're not above us." The offer was bait wrapped in civility, the kind of trap gold lays in plain sight. Eli considered the pouch shining under the lamplight and then looked at the faces around him. The young hands that still believed wealth could fix bones and grief, the older men whose edges had been sanded by compromise, and said, "I found what I needed where the ground couldn't buy it." That admission was like setting a stone on a foundation. It did not explode the room into an epiphany, but it shifted something, a subtle settling of weight that made some patrons shift uncomfortably and others double down on jeers, the old habits rattling like dry leaves. Boone's grin thin. The man who'd always used laughter as a curtain felt the fabric tear and a draft move in. He rolled a coin across the tabletop as if to score the moment with the judgeship of money, but the gesture rang hollow, a token in a play that had changed its script. The saloon, usually a steady, noisy organism, held a fragile pause as men measured a man who had replaced glitter with a steadier light, and in that pause Eli's comb became an instrument that exposed more than one conscience. Some laughed again to hide a new doubt, others were uncomfortably still, and a few quiet faces looked almost relieved, as if a permission had been given not to chase the next glittering thing. Boone swore softly under his breath, anger and fear braided together, because he felt the ground under his rule tilting. He had not lost gold, but he was losing the long that gold had given him over men's tongues and wills. When Eli rose to leave, the room inhaled and exhaled like a body that had passed through shock. Murmurs rose, voices adjusted, and though the mockery returned at half volume, the echo of the miner's words lingered like a scent. A man had declared that some prices are too steep, and in a town that loved cheap bargains, such a declaration would not be easily forgotten. Clay Boone's hand moved like a promise and a threat at once as he slid the leather pouch across the scarred tabletop. It made the soft, inevitable sound, the same small rustle a man hears when a trapdoor closes and knows there is no polite way back, and the saloon seemed to lean in with it, lamplight skittering off the raw edges of the nuggets inside, casting small suns on the grain of the wood and reflecting in the eyes of men who still believed salvation could be weighed and spent. The pouch sat between them like a question posed in a language everyone in the room had learned young. What would you give to erase a year, to buy back a laugh, to stop the ache of a widow's knucking? Boone's voice was smooth, seasoned with the authority of somebody who owns both land and the right to judge, and he spoke the offer as if it were mercy rather than a test. Take it. For old times, you earned it, if you're done pretending you're better than the rest of us. Around them the room thud into a chorus of murmurs and the clink of glass, the old currency of cajoling and contempt, and some faces brightened with a greedy hope at the sight of gold laid out like an altar. Eli looked at the pouch the way a man studies a wound, intently, respectfully, knowing where it had once bled and what lingered beneath the scar tissue. He could feel the history in that pile of yellow rock, men who'd gone down for it and never come up, hands crushed in collapse, pacts made and kept not for friendship but for fear, a brother whose last words were about a seam of quartz no one else ever saw. The gold warmed under the lamp's glow, but Eli felt colder, as if the light revealed not treasure but ledger entries listing the cost of every coin. Boone watched him like a gambler waiting for the tell, expecting appetite to show in some flinch or hardening of the eyes, and he rubbed a finger along the pouch's leather as if to remind Eli what comfort had the power to return. "You can come back," Boone said, softer now, that old conviviality wrestling with impatience. "We can split, no questions. Be one of us like before." The offer was practical cruelty, a hand extended only so the other could be shackled. It smelled of rot masked by perfume. Eli's fingers remained empty in his lap. His pulse, once a drum tune to the rhythm of digging and counting, had thinned into a steadier beat that did not hurry for coin. He remembered the faces of the men he loved and lost, turned to stone in the place where greed had wished them luck, and in those remembered faces he felt the truth. Gold is an honest thing if you only count ounces, but it lies when it promises to make whole what was broken by the wanting. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, the kind that carries because there's no theater in it, only a settled certainty that comes from watching too many lives trade themselves away for glitter. "No, Clay," he said, and the syllables were small but not weak. "That's the devil's trade." The room reacted like a body struck. A few laughed nervously to disguise the tug at their consciences. Some looked away as if they had been named in a prayer, and Boone's fingers tightened on the pouch until the knuckles paled. For Boone, the pouch was leverage and identity both, a ledger that accounted for his power, the proof of his claim on the valley and the proof he could still buy obedience. For Eli, it was the proving of every grief he carried. The weight of lives lost clung to his words like dust. Boone's laugh, at first a brittle shield, ended into something sharper, edged with the sort of anger that recognizes an enemy it cannot quite hit, the idea that a man could value his soul over a sack of metal. He pushed the pouch a breath closer as if proximity might corrode Eli's resolve. But Eli simply folded his hands and met Boone's gaze without flinching. In that look there was neither triumph nor pity, only the steady, stubborn fact of a man who had chosen what he would not sell. The saloon filled with a hum of uneasy energy as men tested their own reflections in the choices before them, and the piano resumed a minor, hesitant tune as if to remind everyone that life went on. But the tune felt different now, notes bent by the tension of what had been offered and refused. Boone's jaw worked. The pouch remained as talisman, but his command over the room had quivered, like a post loosened in the earth. Eli rose then, the motion quiet and final, and left the pouch where it lay, a small heap of temptation that would shimmer under lamplight for as long as someone fed the town's appetite for trade. But now a public object lesson, one not about how much a man could gain, but about what he might cost himself in the bargain. Clay Boone's laughter erupted like a thunderclap in a clear sky, loud and sudden enough to rattle the bottles behind the bar, rolling through the saloon with the force of a man who'd rather drown the quiet than face what it held. "You can keep your gold? I'll keep my soul?" He howled, mocking Eli's calm words with exaggerated reverence, bowing in jest toward the miner before slapping his thigh and doubling over in laughter that grew too hard, too long. The crowd joined in, eager for a cue to break the tension that had thickened the air, and soon the room echoed with false mirth, glasses clinking, boots stomping, men shouting as if loudness itself could undo what had just been said. But under the raucous noise was something hollow, something sharp-edged that no one wanted to acknowledge. Boone's laughter didn't sound like power anymore. It sounded like panic wearing a mask. The lamps flickered against the rough boards, catching the sheen of sweat on Boone's forehead as he leaned back, forcing another round of laughter until even his own men began to falter, their chuckles thinning into coughs. It was the sound of men pretending they didn't hear the truth echoing under the noise, a truth too dangerous for men who'd built their pride on the lie that gold could fill every hunger. Eli didn't move at first. He sat steady as a tree in a storm, eyes fixed on the man whose wealth had bought half the valley but not one peaceful night's sleep. His silence was louder than any retort, heavier than Boone's bluster. When Boone's laughter finally began to fade, turning ragged around the edges, Eli rose slowly. The motion drew the attention of everyone in the room like a tide turning, the light catching his face in soft relief, lines carved by years of toil and regret, but steadied now by something stronger than anger, conviction. He said nothing for a long moment, letting the hush settle, and in that silence, Boone's grin began to falter. The rancher shifted in his chair, clearing his throat, trying to recover the authority that laughter had failed to restore. "What's the matter, Ward?" he said finally, his voice still rough with forced amusement. "Can't take a joke?" Eli's gaze held his like iron meat-eat fire, steady, unflinching, unburned. "One day, Clay," he said quietly, his tone soft but cutting through the room like a blade drawn slow, "you'll find out what your gold can't buy." The words hung in the smoky air, simple, unembellished, and devastating. Somewhere in the corner, the piano player's hands froze above the keys, and no one dared breathe. Boone tried to summon his laugh again, but the sound caught in his throat, coming out as a rough bark rather than a roar. The silence that followed stretched thin, fragile as glass. Eli's shadow cast long across the warped floorboards, reaching up the wall behind Boone like a thing alive, stretching farther than it should have, elongated by the flicker of the lamps and the weight of something unseen. The rancher's eyes flicked toward it, and for just an instant, the image unnerved him. He felt the strange, unwelcome chill of realization crawling through the warmth of his whiskey, that laughter couldn't bury guilt, and gold couldn't shield a man from the price of his own conscience. The men around him shuffled uneasily, sensing the shift in the air. What had been entertainment was now judgment, and none of them wanted to be seen on the wrong side of it. Eli turned without another word, his boots thudding softly against the floor as he made for the door. Each step sounded final, deliberate, echoing through the saloon's uncertain quiet. The bat-wing doors creaked open, letting in a gust of cold night air that made the lamps flitter and dim, and for a heartbeat, Boone sat frozen, half drunk, half defiant, all hollow. When the door swung shut again, his laughter tried once more to find its shape but came out fractured, uncertain. The men watched him in silence, and for the first time in years, Clay Boone looked small, diminished not by another man's wealth or strength, but by his own reflection. The room exhaled as if released from a spell, and Boone's coin sat untouched on the table, gleaming in the lamplight like the eyes of something that had just been named. While we catch our breath by this dusty road, go on and tip your hat to the last rodeo. Give this story a like, and subscribe so you can ride with us again soon. All right then, let's get back on the trail. The wind carried a restless edge that evening, the kind that smelled of rain long before the clouds had gathered, and Eli Ward felt it cutting through the canyon as he rode out of town, his horse's hoofs striking sparks from the rock like echoes of an ending. The trail to the river wound through a valley he knew by heart, each bend, each brittle bush, each ridge that once shimmered under the promise of gold, and as he rode, the sound of the saloon faded behind him until it was swallowed by the steady hum of the wind. He didn't look back. The horizon before him burned orange against a sky swelling dark with storm, the land both familiar and foreign, like the face of an old friend changed by time. Somewhere behind him, Clay Boone stood at his window, a bottle in his hand and bitterness on his breath, watching the miner disappear into the deepening dusk. The rancher's grin twisted like rusted wire as he muttered to no one, "A man without gold ain't worth dust." But even as the words left his lips, they rang false, empty as an echo in a mind long closed. He drained the bottle and slammed it against the sill, though the satisfaction he sought refused to come. Outside, thunder growled low over the ridge, a sound that seemed to move the air itself. The sky broke open as night fell, rain slashing the plains with sudden, merciless force. Boone cursed the weather at first, stomping out onto his porch to bark orders to his ranch hands as they scrambled to drive the cattle toward higher ground. The wind howled back in his face, wet and cold, and lightning split the horizon wide enough to illuminate his empire. The corral, the barns, the neat fences, all trembling under the weight of nature's rage. Within minutes, the rain turned the ground to mire, the river swelling from a whisper to a roar. His men shouted through the deluge, their torches flickering and dying in the wind, but Boone stood frozen beneath the overhang, his fine coat plastered to his shoulders, eyes fixed on the black ribbon of water that was rising faster than any of them could reckon. When the first surge hit, it came with the violence of release, the canyon funneling the storm's fury into one unstoppable torrent. The herd broke before the flood like a single living creature, hooves churning, eyes wild. The corral gave way in a shriek of splintering wood, the sound lost almost instantly to the roar of rushing water. Years of labor, of breeding, of counting, gone in the span of a heartbeat. Boone's ranch hands called to him, begged for orders, but he could not speak. He could only watch as the river he'd thought tamed by his fences and ambition took back what it had always owned. The current swallowed fences, tools, wagons, everything that bore his name or his mark, sweeping it into the black mouth of the canyon. Lightning flashed again, catching his reflection in the window of his house, a pale, hollow face framed by thunder, and for the first time, Boone saw himself as the miner must have seen him, a man standing knee-deep in everything he thought he owned, powerless against what truly ruled the earth. The water tore at the land, the smell of mud and fear thick in the air, and still he stood, frozen, as though waiting for the river to make its final claim. Behind him, the house creaked under the wind's assault. In front of him, the flood devoured his legacy without hesitation or mercy. He could hear his own words, "A man without gold ain't worth dust," mocking him now, carried away by the storm's voice, and the bitter taste of irony filled his mouth. When the worst of it passed, silence returned, heavy and absolute, broken only by the distant wail of cattle carried downstream. Boone stumbled forward, boots sinking into the churned mud where his corral had been, staring at the ruin spread before him. The rain eased to a soft drizzle, the thunder rumbling farther away, and somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard hoofbeats, the slow, measured rhythm of a man riding into peace while another stood drowning in the price of his own greed. By morning, the valley was unrecognizable. What had once been Clay Boone's proud stretch of pastoral land now lay beneath a sprawling plain of mud and broken timber, the river having carved new veins through the earth like a beast reclaiming its territory. The air was heavy with the smell of wet soil and loss, a silence hung thick except for the distant groans of settling debris. Boone stood on what remained of his porch, the boards warped and slick beneath his boots, steering out across the drowned expanse where his barns and fences had once stood in clean, orderly lines. His horses were gone, swept away in the night's chaos, and only the occasional cry of a stranded calf broke the desolation. The rancher's chest burned with disbelief that felt like fury. His land, his pride, his wealth, all buried under the same mud he once considered beneath him. He mounted his horse, one of the few survivors, and spurred it toward the ruins, each hoofbeat sending up a spray of brown water that spattered his once fine coat. The closer he got to the river, the more it looked less like water and more like molten earth, shimmering with a cruel gleam of destruction. He shouted for his men, but none answered. They were scattered, tending to what little could be saved. Boone didn't care. His heart pounded with one thought: something must remain. The flood couldn't have taken everything. He reached the banks, where the land had collapsed into a ragged slope, and slid from his horse, the mud clutching his boots like a living thing. The morning sun pushed through thinning clouds, painting the wreckage in dull gold, and there, among the stones and driftwood, Boone caught a glint. At first, he thought it was just the sun catching water, but then another flash, and another. He dropped to his knees, clawing through the mud with his bare hands until his fingers struck against something solid. Gold. Raw, bright, untamed. Nuggets gleamed up at him from the filth like the earth itself mocking his desperation. A shuddering laugh escaped his throat, half triumph, half madness, as he scooped them up, mud streaking his face and coat. He dug deeper, finding more, each piece a spark that reignited his hunger. The world around him vanished, the ruin, the loss, the silence, all replaced by the fever that had once driven him to own half the valley. The river whispered behind him, "Hello," steady murmur, but Boone didn't hear it. He dug until his nails split, until the blood mixed with mud, until the sharp pain in his hands became just another pulse of obsession. His breath came ragged, his coat heavy with grime. He could almost feel the weight of his fortune returning, piece by piece, and with every handful of gold, he told himself he was not beaten, not yet. But as he leaned closer to the river's edge, another flash caught his eye, not from the gold this time, but from something buried half in the mud, gleaming with a dull, familiar silver. Boone froze. The shape was unmistakable, the handle of a shovel, its metal edge catching the new light. He stared, heart thundering. It was Eli Ward's old shovel, the same one the miner had left behind when he walked away from this cursed pursuit. Boone crawled toward it, his fingers trembling as he brushed the mud away, revealing the engraved initials worn faint by time and toil. For a long moment, he simply stared at it, the storm-washed land stretching endlessly around him. the flood's aftermath painted in the stark language of ruin. The gold in his hand suddenly felt heavier, not like victory but like accusation. He dropped it, the nuggets sinking soundlessly back into the mud, and sat there, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the shovel that seemed to gleam brighter than all the gold he had clawed from the dirt. The sun broke fully through the clouds then, flooding the valley with light, and Boone realized with a hollow ache that Eli Ward, the man he had mocked, the man who had walked away empty-handed, was the only one who'd left this land rich. The river whispered again, softer now, as if to drive the truth deeper. Gold may survive the storm, but peace belongs only to the man who no longer digs. The sun returned shyly to the valley, its warmth thin but steady, as if the land itself was trying to remember how to breathe again after the storm's wrath. Days had passed since the flood, and the once bustling town now moved like an exhausted beast, its people rebuilding fences, drying out supplies, and counting what little remained. Amid the ruin and renewal, Eli Ward walked back into town the same way he'd left it, quiet, steady, his boots coated in road dust, his eyes carrying that same unhurried calm that made others uneasy. His clothes were simple, his hands scarred but sure as he joined the group of men working by the river, helping lay new timbers across the washed-out bridge. The flood had torn through the heart of the valley like a punishment, snapping the bridge in two and scattering debris downriver for miles. Eli lifted beams, swung a hammer, tied rope, each motion deliberate, each breath even. No one asked where he'd been. They didn't have to. There was something in his stillness that made questions feel small. The town needed hands more than answers. From the far rise beyond the bridge, the remains of Boone's ranch could still be seen, a wounded landscape of broken fences and drowned fields. Where once white barns had stood proud under the morning light, now there were only splinters and mud. It was on that rise that Boone himself appeared one afternoon, his silhouette cut jagged against the pale sky. He sat astride a weary horse, shoulders slumped, his once polished boots caked in filth, his fine coat stained by floodwater and smoke. He was barely recognizable as the man who had once ruled the valley with laughter and gold. The townsfolk looked away as he rode down toward the bridge, their voices dimming. Boone dismounted near the riverbank, his steps uncertain, and for a long while he just watched Eli at work, hammer rising, hammer falling, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat. The sight of the miner, unbothered, rebuilding what others had lost, stirred something raw in him. When Eli finally noticed the figure watching, he straightened and wiped his brow, nodding a simple greeting. "Mornin', Clay," he said softly. His voice carried neither pity nor pride. Boone's lips tightened. The air between them felt stretched then, heavy with all the words they'd left unsaid. "You still think you're better than me?" Boone spat, his tone sharp but brittle, like glass about to crack. Eli didn't move at first. He studied the man before him, the once proud rancher now hollow-eyed and hunched, his face mapped by sleepless nights and a hunger that no gold could feed. Boone's eyes burned with something desperate, a question that was more confession than accusation. Finally, Eli set the hammer down and stepped closer, his boots sinking into the damp earth. He shook his head slowly, the gesture small but absolute. "No, Clay," he said, voice low, the words steady as the river's current beside them. "I just learned what I can live without." Boone flinched as if struck. The simplicity of the statement cut deeper than any sermon. Around them, the men kept working in silence, pretending not to listen, though every ear bent toward the exchange. The wind moved through the broken reeds, carrying the scent of mud and new grass, the smell of things trying to live again. Boone's throat worked, but no words came. He looked at Eli, at the calm in his eyes, the quiet dignity in his posture, and for the first time, he understood the depth of his own emptiness. His riches, his land, his pride, all of it had been a shield, and now it was gone, stripped clean by the same river that had taken his herd. Eli turned back to the bridge, picking up his hammer without ceremony. The sound of metal striking wood filled the silence between them, rhythmic and certain, as if marking time for a world learning to mend. Boone stood there for a moment longer, staring at the man who had found peace in the ruins, and then he turned and walked away, each step slow, heavy, like a man crossing a bridge he could no longer see. The sky was still painted with the gray bruise of dawn when Clay Boone rode into town, his horse limping, its mane matted with mud. The storm had ended days ago, yet it clung to him, the smell of rain, the weight of ruin, the silence that no whiskey could fill. His coat hung off him like a ghost of the man he once was, his eyes bloodshot and hollow, fixed not on the waking streets but on the crooked steeple of the old church that cut a fragile line against the paling sky. The saloon lamps had burned out hours ago, leaving only the murmur of wind and the faint clatter of shutters in his wake as he dismounted, boots slapping wet against the ground. He pushed through the church doors without ceremony, their hinges groaning like something old remembering pain. Inside, the air was still, smelling of wax and wood and dust, not the grand sanctity of wealth, but the simple shelter of those who came seeking quiet. And there, in the half-light, sweeping the wooden floor with slow, measured strokes, steadily Eli Ward. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, as though every motion carried weight, not because of the task, but because of the peace behind it. Boone froze just inside the doorway, his hands trembling around the brim of his hat. He hadn't planned what to say. He hadn't planned anything. Words had deserted him the night the river took his fortune. His voice came rough, soaked in bitterness and something that almost sounded like grief. "You prayed for that storm, didn't you?" The accusation cracked through the church like a whip, its echo thin and jagged in the rafters. Eli stopped sweeping. He didn't look surprised, just lifted his head, his eyes steady, calm as the river that had rewritten the valley's face. "No," he said softly. "I prayed for you to see yourself." The words landed without judgment, without cruelty, but Boone felt them like a blow. He stumbled forward a few steps, his boots scuffing the wooden floor. "Well," he said, forcing out a laugh that didn't sound like laughter at all, "I saw plenty. Lost every damn thing I had to that river. My land, my herd, my name. Maybe that's what God wanted, huh?" His voice broke, and he reached into his coat, pulling out a small leather pouch, the same one he'd once offered across a saloon table. It sagged in his palm, nearly empty, a faint metallic jingle inside as he dropped it on the altar with a dull thud. "It's all that's left," he muttered, and for the first time in his life, the sound of gold seemed to embarrass him. Eli leaned his broom against the pew and walked toward the altar, his boots whispering against the floorboards. He looked down at the pouch for a moment, not touching it yet, his face unreadable except for a kind of quiet sorrow. Then, without a word, he picked it up and turned toward the open door. Boone blinked, confused. "What are you doing?" he rasped, following him outside. The morning light had brightened, spilling soft over the riverbank where the water now ran calm, clear, deceptively gentle after its violence. Eli walked right to the edge, the pouch still in his hand, and for a long moment, he simply watched the current twist around the stones. Then he tossed it, not with drama, not with anger, but with the same easy finality of a man laying a burden down. The pouch spun once in the air, glinting faintly, before it vanished into the current with a single muted splash. The water swallowed it whole, leaving only ripples that stretched, shimmered, and then disappeared. Boone stared, his throat tight, his hands hanging useless at his sides. He wanted to shout, to curse, to reach in and pull the thing back, but something inside him stopped him, a realization that clawed at the edges of his chest. He felt lighter somehow, though the feeling came with a deep, strange emptiness, as if something had been cut away that he'd mistaken for life. Eli turned to him, his expression gentle but firm. "You don't need that kind of weight anymore," he said quietly. Boone tried to speak but couldn't, his voice cracked, his breath shallow. The sound of the river filled the silence between them, steady and endless, washing through the wreckage of two men who had built their lives on different kinds of faith. Boone dropped to a knee without meaning to, not in prayer, but in surrender. The morning wind passed through the valley, brushing against the broken fences, the rebuilt bridge, and the open door of the church. Boone stared at the river's glinting surface, trembling, the tears cutting through the dirt on his face like new rain carving through dry ground. He didn't know yet if this was redemption, but for the first time, the gold he'd lost didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom. The night settled over the valley with a kind of weary peace, the storm-washed air cool and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. The river ran quieter now, whispering to itself under the pale silver of a half-moon. Near its edge, where the bank had begun to dry, Eli Ward sat beside a modest fire, the flames small but steady, their light painting the lines of his weathered face in shades of amber and shadow. He had made a simple camp, no tent, just a bedroll and his hat set neatly beside him, the quiet comfort of a man who needed little. The fire crackled softly, the sound mingling with the low murmur of the river and the occasional rustle of leaves in the night wind. He was staring into the flames when the faint rhythm of approaching hooves broke the silence. Eli didn't move, he simply waited, as if he had known someone would come. A minute later, Claiborne appeared on horseback, his silhouette outlined in the fire's glow, his shoulders slumped, his posture less that of a man and more that of a shadow. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the damp ground, and for a moment, he stood there without a word, his eyes locked on the fire as though it might burn away the darkness that clung to him. Eli gestured wordlessly toward the opposite side of the fire, and Boone sat, the movement stiff and awkward. For a long stretch, neither spoke. The flames filled the silence between them, rising and falling like breath, their light catching in Boone's hollow eyes. "I didn't come for forgiveness," he said finally, his voice rough and low, each word dragging itself out as if it resisted being spoken. I can't keep it in anymore." Eli said nothing, only nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. Boone took off his hat, ran a trembling hand through his unkempt hair, and stared into the fire as though the truth could only be told to something that didn't answer back. "Greed got in me, Eli," he said after a long pause, his words thick with shame. "Not just the one of gold, the need for it. I cheated men I called friends, stole from partners, lied about claims. I even took a man's life once, up north, when he tried to cut in on a seam I'd found. Told myself it was justice, but it was just hunger, same as every other sin I ever dressed up in fancy talk." His hands clenched in the dirt, knuckles white, veins standing out like cords. It never stopped. The more I had, the more I needed. The ranch, the land, it was all built on someone else's back. On someone else's grave. He laughed then, but it wasn't laughter. It was the hollow sound of something breaking apart. The fire popped sharply, a spark leaping into the night before vanishing in the dark. Eli watched him with quiet eyes, the same patience he had once shown the stubborn earth when it refused to give him gold. "Gold blinds," Eli said softly, the words carrying no accusation, only the weight of understanding. "But it ain't the gold's fault, it's the man's hunger." Boone turned to him, his face streaked with tears that cut clean lines through the dirt. "You really kept your soul, didn't you?" he whispered, voice trembling. Eli didn't answer. He only looked back at the fire, its light reflected in his eyes like the faint glow of something unbroken. The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick, sacred almost, filled with the quiet sound of the river and the soft hiss of burning wood. Boone's breath shuddered in his chest, his confession leaving him hollow, but not hopeless. He wiped at his face with the back of his sleeve, smearing the dirt but not the tears. The fire burned lower, the flames shrinking into a deep orange glow. Boone's shoulders eased slightly, as though the weight he'd carried for years had begun to slip away. Neither man spoke again, but they didn't need to. The night around them seemed to listen, to hold their silence with reverence. And as the river flowed and the fire cracked softly between them, it felt, for just a moment, as if the earth itself forgave them both. While we catch our breath by this dusty road, go on and tip your hat to the last rodeo. Give this story a like, and subscribe so you can ride with us again soon. All right then. Let's get back on the trail. The first hint of sunrise crawled over the mountains like a reluctant confession, spilling pale gold across the scarred earth as Eli Ward led Clay Boone along the narrow trail that wound toward the mouth of the old mine. The air was cold and still, the kind of quiet that makes a man listen to the rhythm of his own guild. The storm's aftermath had stripped the valley bare, trees torn, soil gutted. But up here, the world was unchanged, frozen in the silence of what had been buried long before the flood. Boone followed a few paces behind, his boots crunching over loose stones, his breath visible in the dawn chill. He hadn't been here in years, but the place still knew him. It seemed to stare back with the same cold familiarity a mirror offers a sinner. When they reached the entrance, Boone stopped dead. The wooden beams that had once held the mouth open were splintered and half collapsed. leaning like old bones. Cobwebs hung in the corners, catching the morning light like the fragile veins of something long dead. Eli stood before it, quiet, his hat low against the sunrise. "This is where I lost myself," he said, his voice even, though it carried the weight of confession. Then he turned his head slightly, meeting Boone's eyes. "And where you can start finding yours." Boone swallowed hard, the taste of dust and regret thick in his mouth. He wanted to turn back, to claim that redemption wasn't something men like him deserved, but the miner's words pinned him in place. So he followed, ducking under the broken beam as they stepped into the dark. Inside, the air was heavy, the kind of damp cold that clings to your bones. The smell was sharp, earth, rot, and rust, a scent Boone remembered all too well. Their footsteps echoed in the hollow tunnel, the sound bouncing off the stone walls like a heartbeat in a coffin. Eli carried a small lantern, its flame trembling against the dark as they moved deeper, the light flickering across the uneven walls where pick marks from long dead hands still lingered. "There was a man," Eli said after a while, his voice low, steady. "A partner of yours, wasn't there?" Name was Silas Red. Boone flinched at the name. "You remember him," Eli continued. "Good man. Quiet. Work this shaft with you till the cave in." Boone's voice cracked. "It wasn't my fault," he said, but the words rang hollow in the narrow space. "Wasn't it?" Eli asked softly. "You took his claim after. Told the law he died before the cave collapsed." Boone said nothing. The lantern light caught the shimmer of moisture on his face, and for the first time in years, he didn't try to hide the tears. They reached a section where the tunnel had caved inward, the dirt and rock piled high, hardened by time. Eli set down the lantern, pulled a shovel from his back, and began to dig, not for gold, but for truth. Boone watched him for a moment before dropping to his knees beside him, clawing at the earth with his bare hands. The sound of shovels and strained breath filled the air, mixing with the faint hum of wind that seeped through cracks in the stone. Minutes stretched into hours until, finally, Boone's fingers scraped against something metallic. He froze. Together, they brushed away the dirt until the glint of rusted iron revealed itself. A small locket, half buried, its chain tangled in the debris. Boone picked it up, his hands shaking, the metal cold and fragile against his skin. He turned it over and pried it open. Inside, behind the cracked glass, was a faded photograph of a woman and a child, the same face Boone remembered from the day Silas had shown it to him, his eyes full of hope and promise. Boone's breath hitched, and he sank back against the rock, the locket pressed to his chest. Tears carved streaks through the grime on his face, and his shoulders trembled under the weight of everything he'd buried in that mine: greed, guilt, and the ghost of a friend he'd traded for gold. Eli watched quietly, saying nothing. The mine seemed to listen too, its silence no longer suffocating but solemn, as if the earth itself was holding witness to the reckoning. Boone wept until the echoes faded, and when he finally looked up, the miner was still there, steady, patient, the lantern light flickering between them like the faint pulse of something that refused to die. Boone's voice came hoarse, broken. "I stole his life," he whispered. Eli nodded slowly. "Then you start by giving it back." The words weren't condemnation. They were an offering, a path back through the darkness. Boone looked at the locket again, and for the first time, he felt the weight of gold lift from his soul, replaced by the far heavier burden of remembrance. But in that weight, there was something new, something clean. The morning broke soft and gold over the valley, a gentler light than the ones before, the kind that seemed to forgive what the night had taken. The air was still cool from the dawn, and the scent of damp earth lingered, heavy with the weight of memory. Boone and Eli had climbed the ridge in silence, the small bundle they carried between them wrapped carefully in worn canvas, its shape fragile, its purpose sacred. The trail wound upward through the scrub and shale until it opened onto a clearing where a lone oak tree stood, its branches spread wide like a guardian watching over the valley below. Beneath its shade, the ground was soft, rich from years of fallen leaves, and it was there that Eli stopped. He looked out across the land, the same land that had once driven men mad with its promise of gold, and for the first time in years, he felt something whole stirring within it again. Boone knelt beside him, setting the bundle down with trembling hands. The weight of it seemed impossibly light for all it carried. Neither man spoke as Eli began to dig, the sound of the shovel steady and sure, each motion an act of reverence rather than labor. Boone joined him, scooping at the loose soil with his hands, the dirt packing under his nails, the sweat running clean tracks through the grime on his face. They worked slowly, carefully, until the hole was deep enough. Then, together, they lowered the canvas-wrapped remains into the earth. Boone's breath caught when he saw the locket again, gleaming faintly in the morning light where it rested against the bundle. He had wiped it clean the night before, polishing away the rust until the image inside, faded though it was, looked like the ghost of a smile. For a long moment, neither moved. Eli placed a hand on Boone's shoulder and bowed his head. "Say your piece," he said softly. Boone hesitated, his throat tight, his voice catching somewhere between grief and guilt. "I can't give him back what I took," he whispered. "No," Eli said, "but you can give him rest." Boone nodded, and his hands closed over the soil, pulling it down, one handful at a time. Each scoop landed with a muted thud, a rhythm of release. When the last of it was done, Boone stayed kneeling, staring at the mound, his breath uneven. He reached for his knife, the blade dulled and scarred from years of misuse, and began carving into a piece of wood he'd carried up the hill. The work was clumsy but earnest, each cut slow and deliberate, the blade scraping and clicking in the quiet. When it was done, he drove the makeshift cross into the earth at the head of the grave, pressing it deep until it stood firm against the morning wind. The two men sat back on their heels, their chests rising and falling in unison. Eli closed his eyes and spoke a few words under his breath, not a sermon, not a plea, just a simple prayer, a request for forgiveness carried not to heaven but to the ground itself. The wind picked up gently, curling through the grass and leaves, carrying the sound of the river below. But this time it was not the angry, swollen roar of the flood. It was soft, calm, almost musical, the kind of sound that could heal a man's heartbeat if he let it. Boone removed his hat, lowering his head in silent reverence. The lines in his face seemed to ease, the hardness in his shoulders softening as the morning sun caught the edge of his hair. "Never thought I'd find peace out here," he murmured, voice breaking with a strange, tender disbelief. Eli looked at him, his expression faintly amused and quietly kind. "Peace was always waiting, Clay," he said, his tone warm as the sunlight breaking through the leaves. "You were just digging in the wrong place." Boone's eyes lifted to the horizon, where the valley stretched out in endless green, the scars of the flood already beginning to fade. The wind shifted again, brushing against the cross as if to bless it, and for a moment, both men stood still, listening, not to the past that haunted them, but to the calm that had finally come to claim its place. The days that followed settled over the valley like a long exhale, the chaos of the flood giving way to a rhythm of rebuilding and quiet reflection. The river ran calm again, glinting under the morning sun as though trying to apologize for its fury. Boone rose each dawn with the others now, no longer the rancher shouting orders from a porch but a man among men, calloused hands gripping rope and hammer, shoulders aching with honest work. The bridge that had been washed away by the storm began to rise again, plank by plank, beam by beam, its construction a shared act of redemption for a town that had once worshipped gold more than goodness. Eli Ward worked beside them, the same steady patience in his movements as when he mined the earth, but now his labor gave rather than took. There was a strange grace to his silence. Where others spoke to fill the air, Eli spoke only when needed, and when he did, men listened, not because he demanded it, but because the calm in his voice carried a kind of truth you couldn't buy or bottle. Boone, who once believed worth was measured in what a man could own, began to understand the quieter kind of wealth, the respect that's earned not with coin but with consistency. He hauled lumber, patched roofs, carried stones, and for the first time, no one flinched at his name. The town itself seemed to breathe easier, shutting the habits that had bound it. The saloon, once the center of noise and vice, now closed early, its piano gathering dust as men spent their evenings mending fences and helping neighbors rebuild. The laughter that echoed through the streets now came not from drunkenness but from shared labor, from the pride of shaping something lasting with their own hands. Boone had not known this kind of laughter before, the kind that cleans rather than covers. His shoulders straightened, his eyes cleared, and though the lines of regret never left his face, they softened into something almost peaceful. Eli's legend grew quietly among them, They began to call him the man who left gold behind, a phrase spoken half in awe, half in gratitude. It wasn't the kind of fame Eli cared for, but he accepted it as he accepted everything, with humility and a faint smile. On a morning when the air was crisp enough to taste, Boone walked toward the riverbank where Eli sat alone, watching the sunrise spill over the hills. The new bridge gleamed behind them, still raw with fresh wooden nails, a testament to what men could mend when pride no longer ruled them. Boone carried 2 tin cups of coffee, the steam rising in lazy curls. He sat down beside the miner without a word, offering him one of the cups. Eli took it with a nod, the corners of his mouth curling slightly. For a moment, they just sat there, the quiet stretching easy between them, broken only by the murmur of the water below and the distant hammering from town. Boone took a slow sip, grimaced at the bitterness, and laughed softly. "You were right, miner," he said finally, voice low but steady. Eli turned to him, the firelight of dawn catching in his eyes, and chuckled under his breath. "No one's right out here, Play," he said. "We just try not to be wrong too long." Boone smiled then, an honest, weary smile that came from somewhere deep and real. The sun crested the ridge fully, spilling gold across the valley, but this gold didn't glitter with greed. It glowed warm and steady, painting the rebuilt bridge, the quiet town, and the faces of 2 men who had finally learned what it meant to build instead of bury. For the first time in his life, Boone didn't look away from the sunrise. He let it touch him. It's like it's sinking into the cracks of a man who had been broken and remade by something stronger than fortune, truth, forgiveness, and the kind of peace that doesn't have a price. The morning was clear, quiet, and still, the kind of calm that settles over a place after every storm. Every reckoning, every word that needed saying has been spoken. The town had begun to breathe again. Its wounds mended, its people softened, its spirit stronger than before. Smoke curled gently from new chimneys, the bridge stood firm against the river's current, and the saloon piano, though seldom played, no longer carried the sound of sorrow or greed. Eli Ward stood on the edge of town, his pack slung over one shoulder, hat tipped low against the rising sun. His eyes swept across the valley that had once consumed so much of his life, every ridge, every stream, every scar carved by the flood, and in its quiet rebirth, he felt no ownership, no claim, only a deep, wordless gratitude. His work here was done. He had helped rebuild what mattered, not just the bridge or the barns, but the men themselves, their trust, their faith, their understanding of what kind of riches last longer than gold. He felt it in the air, that rare kind of peace that doesn't demand attention, that simply exists. Boone came striding up behind him, boots crunching on the gravel, his figure still marked by labor but no longer weighed down by shame. His clothes were plain, his hands rough, but his eyes, once sharp with pride, now carried the humble steadiness of a man who'd made peace with himself. "You're really leaving, then?" Boone said, his tone somewhere between question and acceptance. Eli turned to face him, a small smile touching his lips. "Ain't much left for me here, Clay. The town's got its footing back. You've got men who'll follow you for the right reasons now. That's enough." Boone nodded slowly, chewing on the words like they were heavier than they sounded. "Least let me give you a horse," he said after a pause, motioning toward the corral nearby. "Got a fine one, sure-footed, strong, and faster than the wind. You'll cover more ground before nightfall." Eli chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I'll walk," he said, his voice calm, steady as the earth beneath them. "The ground's been good to me. Feels honest under my boots." Boone stared at him for a long moment, the corners of his mouth twitching between pride and melancholy. There was something in Eli's words that struck deeper than the simple refusal of a gift. It was the truth of a man who'd found enough within himself to need nothing more. Boone wanted to say something, "Thank you, maybe, or I owe you," but the words tangled on his tongue. Eli's smile widened just slightly, as if he understood what Boone couldn't speak. He reached out, shook the rancher's hand, the grip firm, warm, final. "Take care of this place," he said quietly. "It's yours to keep right now. Don't let it turn hollow again." Boone swallowed hard and nodded, his throat tight. "You got my word," he said, the promise low but sure. Eli tipped his hat, then turned toward the road that led out of town, his boots stirring up soft dust as he began to walk. The townsfolk who had gathered nearby watched him go, some offering silent nods, others simply standing in still respect. Boone stayed where he was, his shadow stretching long across the morning ground. The sun climbed higher, catching Eli's figure as it grew smaller in the distance, painting him in gold, not the gold that glitters or blinds, but the kind that glows from within, the kind that no river can wash away. The light lingered on him as he walked into the horizon, his outline merging with the hills until he became part of the land itself, a man who had found peace and left it behind for others to follow. Boone stood for a long time after, staring at the place where the miner had vanished, and for the first time in his life, he understood that some men don't need monuments. The road beneath Eli's boots, the sunrise above his shoulders, and the quiet pride in Boone's heart were monument enough. Years rolled by like the slow bend of the river, and the valley that had once been carved by greed and flood began to carry a new kind of story, one not written in gold or blood, but in the quiet memory of two men who had found redemption where the world least expected it. The town grew again, though not in the way of booming fortunes or struck veins. Its barns stood straighter, its bridges stronger, and its people learned to build rather than chase, to measure their worth not in ounces or acres, but in the steadiness of their word. Boone's ranch rose from ruin, not through the weight of treasure but through the honest weight of labor. His hands, once soft with privilege, became calloused with the same grit that once defined the miner he had marked. The cattle multiplied, the fields turned green, and though gold still shimmered faintly in the riverbeds, no one bothered to dig. It was as if the land itself had decided it had given enough. Travelers passing through would often stop in the town's saloon, now a place of stories instead of vice, and hear whispers of the miner and the rancher. The tale was told differently depending on who spoke it. Some said the miner was a ghost, others swore he was just a man who'd walked away from wealth and found something purer. A few believed he'd never left at all, that his spirit still roamed the hills, watching over the town that had once lost its soul and found it again in the mud and water of repentance. Boone, gray now and slower with age, would sit on his porch in the evenings, polishing the old locket he kept near his heart, the same one he'd found in the mine, the locket of Silas Red, the man he'd once betrayed. He never spoke of that day, but the men who worked for him knew better than to ask. They only saw the way his eyes softened when the sun dropped low and painted the valley in gold, and they'd catch him whispering something to the wind, a kind of prayer or promise. Under his care, the ranch thrived, not from the gold that once lured men to madness, but from kindness, from fair wages, from a man who had learned that the truest wealth lay not in owning land, but in being worthy of it. And beyond the hills, where the earth still bore the scars of old mines, the wind moved differently. On certain evenings, when the sun bled into the mountains and the river sang low and soft, travelers claimed they saw it, a faint glimmer beneath a lone oak tree on the ridge, the metal edge of a rusted shovel catching the last light of day. They said no one dared to touch it, not out of fear, but out of reverence, for everyone knew whose hands had set it down. The ground there was undisturbed, wildflowers sprouting around it, roots wrapping it in quiet protection as if the earth itself knew the story it guarded. Folks swore that if you stood there at sunset, when the air turned still and golden, and listened closely enough, you could hear it, the wind carrying a voice, deep and steady, echoing through the grass and the stone. Some said it was just the breeze catching the old oak leaves. Others said it was something more. "You can keep your gold," the voice would whisper faintly, fading in it out with the sigh of the wind. "I'll keep my soul." And when the last of the light slipped behind the horizon, those who heard it always walked away changed, not richer, not poorer, but reminded that in a world that still worshipped what glitters, there once lived a man who chose what glowed from within. And so the legend lingered, passed from one generation to the next, not as a warning, but as a quiet promise, that somewhere in the heart of the frontier, where men had traded too much for too long, a single miner's soul still kept watch, proving that peace, once found, could never truly be lost. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again. Hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat dipped to the past and your heart pointed west.